They laughed in her face, called her a child playing dress-up, and tossed her out like she was trash. Her sister cried the whole way home, but she didn't. She took out her phone and whispered just one sentence into the camera, "You're going to regret this." What the dealership didn't know was that her last name could buy the building 10 times over, and her father had built his empire on one principle: never let disrespect go unchecked. What happens when money meets morality? And how far would a billionaire dad go to teach the world a lesson it won't forget? The dealership was all glass and shine, the kind of place meant to intimidate even the wealthy. 2 girls stepped through its tall, automatic doors just before sunset, their sneakers squeaking slightly against the pristine tile. They were 16 and 17, both wearing oversized hoodies and jeans, their laughter light and easy as they stared at the luxury cars like museum pieces. The younger one, Lily, pointed at a silver convertible and whispered, "That one's mine," while Ava, her older sister, grinned and shot a mock-serious video on her phone, manifesting. To them, it was just fun, a spontaneous stop on their way home from a smoothie run. But to the man who watched from across the showroom floor, it was a problem. Gerald, the floor manager, was a man of rigid judgments and sharp suits. He narrowed his eyes at the girls, muttered something under his breath, and stormed across the room like a mall cop on a power trip. "You two lost?" he asked, loud enough to draw attention from the sales team. Ava blinked, then laughed. "We're just looking." Gerald folded his arms. "This isn't a playground. You're not buying anything, so don't touch the cars." The air shifted. The girls froze, stunned by the tone. "We're not touching anything," Lily whispered. Gerald rolled his eyes. "Out. Now. Before I call security." Ava's face turned red, humiliated. She started to speak, but Gerald raised his hand. "Don't argue. You're not welcome here." A few customers turned away awkwardly. One, a man by the coffee machine, pulled out his phone and filmed the scene. He captured Lily's trembling lip, Ava's clenched jaw, and Gerald's dismissive wave as he physically motioned them toward the exit. "This is ridiculous," Ava said, tears threatening to spill. But Gerald leaned closer. "And if you post this online," he hissed, "don't expect anyone to care. People like you don't belong here." That's when Ava did something no one expected. She turned her phone toward her face, hit record, and whispered, "You're going to regret this." Then she took her sister's hand and walked out without another word. Outside, they sat on the curb. Lily cried. Ava didn't. She simply texted their dad. One line, "We were just kicked out of a dealership. Can we talk?" 30 miles away, in an office overlooking a skyline of steel and glass, Raymond Vega read the message. His heart didn't race. His blood didn't boil. It froze. Because the moment he read it, something in him cracked, not just for his daughters, but for every time he had been dismissed and overlooked. He called his assistant. "Get me the name of the manager at the luxury dealership." His voice was level, but his eyes were not. The fire that once built his empire had reignited. By morning, the dealership would be the stage, and Raymond Vega, its unseen executioner. Raymond Vega's name rarely appeared in public headlines, but when it did, it was always followed by the same whispered phrase, "the man who never forgets." Unlike most billionaires, Raymond had no social media footprint, no press junkets, and no flashy interviews. He moved through the world with calculated silence, leaving behind only ripples of influence and clean, decisive footprints. Born in the backroom of a mechanic's garage in East Oakland, he was the son of a single mother and a father whose name never made it onto his birth certificate. His mother, Mariana, scrubbed floors during the day and repaired engines at night, teaching Raymond to balance books and rebuild carburetors before he could even drive. Money wasn't just scarce, it was a ghost, something other people believed in. But Raymond learned early that value wasn't in what you had, it was in how you were treated. At 17, he turned a scholarship rejection into a lawsuit, exposing racial bias in a prestigious Ivy League institution. He didn't just win, he made them rewrite their entire admissions policy. That was the first time the world realized Raymond wasn't someone to underestimate. Over the next 2 decades, he built a tech empire rooted in encryption software, then sold it to a multinational conglomerate for $2.1 billion. But it wasn't the money that changed him, it was the silence that followed. Raymond bought property across cities, funneled his wealth into anonymous charities, and retreated from the public eye. The only visible sign of his fortune was the quiet estate perched high above the city, guarded by stone lions and acres of solitude. Inside, however, was life, his life, reborn through his daughters. Ava and Lily were everything to him, not just because they were his blood, but because they reminded him of Mariana. They had her curiosity, her stubbornness, her ability to read a room with a glance. After Mariana died in a car accident when Raymond was in his 20s, he vowed two things: to never let anyone speak down to a woman again, and to ensure his daughters would never know the taste of helplessness. He raised them with freedom but also precision. Private tutors, immersion in multiple languages, training in negotiation, philanthropy, and coding before high school. But he also taught them to hide their last name when necessary, not out of shame, but because the world treated people differently depending on the weight of their signature. He knew the game, and he taught them how to beat it with a smile. So when Ava's text arrived, calm, composed, but soaked in humiliation, Raymond didn't ask for more details. He didn't need to. In his mind, he saw it all: the condescension, the mocking smiles, the way grown men treated teenage girls as if their presence in a luxury space was an offense. The irony was bitter. He had once been that boy standing outside glass doors, watching others sit behind desks he'd never been invited to. But now, he owned more glass than they could imagine. And he wasn't going to shatter the dealership's windows. He was going to make them see their own reflection in every panel. He summoned his assistant, Clara, a former litigator with the eyes of a chess player. "I want the dealership profiled. Full ownership report. Financial vulnerabilities. Supply chain weaknesses. Personnel files, if possible." Clara didn't blink. "You want to buy them?" He exhaled slowly. "I want to study them." While the dealership locked its doors for the night, Raymond unlocked a folder on his encrypted laptop marked Contingency Alpha. It had only ever been opened once before, when a private school refused to enroll Ava due to concerns about her adjusting socially. That school now bore Raymond's mother's name. What he planned for the dealership wasn't revenge. It was education, radical, surgical, and public. He wasn't interested in apologies, free cars, or hollow reparation. He was going to orchestrate a performance that would force a reckoning. Not just with Gerald, but with every system that taught him it was okay to dismiss two girls because they didn't look rich enough to matter. In the morning, he would send two of his drivers to the dealership in the Rolls-Royces. The third car, the one he drove himself, would arrive last, after the message had already started whispering through the staff like a ghost. But before any of that, he walked into the living room where Ava and Lily sat curled up on the couch. They looked up, unsure. He knelt between them, took their hands, and said, "Tomorrow, I'm not going to fix this for you. I'm going to open the door. You'll decide how hard it closes behind you." The morning sun hadn't yet warmed the glass facade of the dealership when the first Rolls-Royce turned the corner, its polished obsidian frame catching the light like a blade. The dealership opened at 9, but by 8:45, 3 salesmen were already at the front windows, coffee in hand, eyes narrowing. The car pulled into the customer drop-off lane. Long, elegant, unmistakably bespoke. Then came the second, a matching phantom silver with a deep navy roof, driven by a man in a 3-piece suit and white gloves. Silence fell inside the showroom as jaws lowered just a fraction. 2 ultra-luxury vehicles arriving at the same time wasn't just rare, it was unheard of. Gerald, already irritated by a minor tech issue and a double-booked test drive, stepped forward with forced enthusiasm and a flick of his jacket. When the drivers stepped out and opened the back doors simultaneously, no one emerged. Not yet. They simply stood there, silent, holding the doors open as if waiting for royalty. Gerald strode outside, trying not to betray the slight sweat gathering under his collar, but the moment he approached, the driver of the first car handed him a small, matte black envelope. Inside was a simple business card with a golden crest embossed on it. It read, "Mr. Vega will be arriving shortly. Please extend the utmost courtesy and discretion. Failure to do so will be noted." No title. No first name. Just that. Before Gerald could even turn around, a third vehicle came into view. Sleeker, darker, customized beyond any factory default. It was the kind of car collectors whispered about, the kind built to spec over months, each detail selected by someone who understood power wasn't loud. It was precise. When the third Rolls stopped, Gerald adjusted his cuffs and pasted on a smile. He still didn't connect the dots, not fully. Just another rich guy, he assumed, coming in to show off. Maybe a celebrity. Maybe foreign royalty. Either way, someone who didn't need to be told to stay off the showroom floor. The back door of the third car opened slowly, and out stepped Raymond Vega. No cameras. No entourage. Just him. A tailored charcoal grey coat, gloves removed as he walked, and eyes that scanned the dealership like a general entering enemy territory. Gerald stepped forward, hand out. "Welcome to our dealership. I'm Gerald Lawson, floor manager. How may we assist?" Raymond didn't shake his hand. Instead, he looked around, measured the space, then finally met Gerald's gaze. "You're the one," he said flatly. Gerald hesitated. "I'm sorry." Raymond tilted his head. "You told my daughters they didn't belong here." The color drained from Gerald's face so fast it left a ghost in its place. I don't, sir, I meet many clients," Raymond raised a finger. "Just one." A calm signal to stop speaking. "You dismissed them. Not because they misbehaved. Not because they were rude. But because of what you assumed when you looked at them." Gerald tried to pivot. "Mr. Vega, I assure you, if there's been a misunderstanding, there hasn't," Raymond said. Then he looked around and gestured for the drivers to close the car doors. "I'm not here for an apology. I'm here to make you an offer." The entire staff had slowly begun to gather around, sensing something monumental unfolding. One of the newer hires, a young man named Jacob, whispered, "That's Raymond Vega. I think he owns part of Apollo Tech. And Palisade Shipping." And Gerald's stomach twisted. Raymond continued, his voice even. "I'd like to buy this dealership. Fully. Today. I'll pay in liquid assets. No banks. No middlemen. No due diligence. But under one condition." Gerald, eager to recover ground, leaned in. "Of course. What condition?" Raymond's eyes locked on him. "You stay." The room shifted. "You will not be fired. You will remain the manager for the next 60 days. Every single person you dismissed, ignored, or humiliated in the past will remain here, too. But you will answer to me. Personally. And everything that happens from this moment forward will be recorded. Studied. Broadcast, if I choose. If that's uncomfortable, walk away now." Gerald laughed nervously. "This is a joke." "Does it look like I'm joking?" Raymond asked. A few team members backed away. Gerald looked to his assistant manager for help, but the man simply shrugged, stunned into silence. "Why would you want to keep me here if you're buying this place?" Gerald asked. Raymond folded his hands behind his back. "Because I believe in systems. I believe in letting a man reveal who he is when he thinks no one's watching. I believe you're going to teach this entire team more in 60 days than I ever could with training modules or corporate retreats." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "And because you don't deserve to be fired quietly. You deserve to learn. Out loud." The room was silent except for the quiet hiss of the automatic doors closing behind him. "You'll get your full salary," Raymond added. "You'll even get a bonus. But if I find so much as one unpaid intern, one racial slur, one exploitation of a woman or customer on your record, I will bury this place. And you." Gerald, white as a sheet, forced a weak smile. "And if I say no?" Raymond took a step closer, not menacing, but unshakable. "Then every car you've sold, every deal you've made, every lie you've told, I'll turn them into a class action lawsuit you won't survive. You won't lose your job. You'll lose your name." Gerald nodded slowly, cornered but trying to look dignified. "Welcome aboard," Raymond said coolly, then turned to Ava and Lily, who had just entered quietly behind him, dressed not in designer clothes, but in the same hoodies they wore yesterday. "Let's begin." The next 48 hours inside the dealership felt less like a workplace and more like a psychological experiment orchestrated by an invisible hand. Raymond Vega didn't move in with the arrogance of a new owner flaunting authority. Instead, he observed, quietly, strategically, with a deliberate absence that spoke louder than any corporate email or staff meeting. He had the cameras installed first. Not hidden ones, but clear, visible domes mounted in corners and angled ceilings. Their blinking red lights a constant reminder that every word, every glance, and every decision was being documented. The sales team, already unnerved by Gerald's obvious discomfort around the new boss, began treading lightly. But Gerald, ever desperate to regain control, put on a mask of fake hospitality. He gave long-winded speeches about turning over new leaf and team unity, while quietly asking the IT guy if there was any way to override or loop the footage in his office. Raymond saw through it all. He didn't need microphones to know that Gerald's snake-like charm was still venomous beneath the surface. But Raymond didn't react. Instead, he sent a memo that would flip the dealership's world upside down. The memo announced a company-wide reality integration initiative. It was worded like a corporate seminar, complete with buzzwords like transparency culture and immersive rebranding, but it boiled down to one bold directive. All team members would be evaluated not only on sales and performance, but on behavior, bias, and respect, especially toward women, youth, and people of color. For 60 days, the dealership would remain open under its original name, but every customer interaction would be monitored, analyzed, and graded by an independent third-party ethics firm Raymond contracted for this exact purpose. At first, the team thought it was a scare tactic. Then they saw the firm's representatives walk through the doors with clipboards and subtle earpieces. Ava and Lily arrived the next day, not as visitors or VIPs, but as interns under assumed names, their roles strategically unannounced. Ava was placed with customer service and shadowed front desk interactions, while Lily was assigned to inventory management, often moving between the garage, storage, and sales floor. Most employees treated them with indifference, unaware of who they were. Some, including Gerald, gave them orders like they were barely qualified to fetch coffee. Ava took notes. Lily listened. Neither spoke of who they were. They simply watched. One afternoon, Lily overheard a junior salesperson mocking a Spanish-speaking customer behind his back, misquoting prices, and laughing about how those people never buy anyway. Ava was handed a complaint log that mysteriously left out several female customers who had walked out mid-sale. When she asked why, her supervisor shrugged and said, "Some women just come in to feel important." Ava reported it to Clara, Raymond's assistant, who logged it without emotion. Gerald, in the meantime, tried to present himself as reformed. He offered Ava a mentor lunch, during which he condescendingly explained how young women in luxury spaces need thicker skin. Lily caught him once staring at her chest while she walked past with a clipboard. She didn't flinch. She just looked him in the eye and said, "Is there something you'd like me to document?" The heat in his face told her everything. But still, Raymond did nothing outwardly aggressive. No firings. No public reprimands. He let the rope unspool. He knew that when people feel safe, they expose themselves. And Gerald was starting to feel safe again. Then came the offer. A week into the experiment, Raymond called a full staff meeting. Everyone assembled in the main showroom, the lights dimmed slightly, and the sleek projection screen descended from the ceiling like a curtain call. Clara clicked a remote and played clips from the security footage. No narration. No edits. Just raw moments. A sales associate rolling his eyes at an elderly woman asking about financing. A mechanic laughing at a female customer's complaint about engine noise. Gerald making a joke about quota hires during a coffee break. Then the screen went black. Raymond stepped forward. "What you just saw wasn't hidden footage. It was what you showed us willingly, in full view of your colleagues and customers." The room was silent. A few pale faces, a few guilty eyes. Raymond continued. "What I'm offering now isn't punishment. It's a choice." He explained that the dealership would remain open, but under a new philosophy, radical meritocracy. Every employee could choose to stay and be evaluated purely on ethics, respect, and adaptability. No favoritism. No tenure. The top 50% would receive raises, bonuses, and promotion opportunities at Vega Industries. The bottom 50%. Immediate termination, no severance. Panic rippled through the team like a silent wave. Gerald tried to object, claiming unrealistic expectations, but Raymond held up a contract bearing Gerald's signature from the sale agreement. You agreed to these terms when you accepted the bonus. You didn't read the fine print. That's not just a mistake. That's your pattern. Gerald was trapped. But the rest of the staff had a decision to make. Some stormed out. Others stayed, unsure whether they were brave or foolish. But Raymond didn't flinch. He closed the meeting with one final reminder. Respect is not a policy. It's a mirror. And for 60 days, this place will reflect every single one of you. If you don't like what you see, change. Or leave before it shows the world who you really are. And with that, he walked out, the screen behind him flickering once more, not with footage, but with a live message in bold white text. Day 8. Eyes open. Integrity begins now. By day 21, the dealership no longer resembled the place it once was. The atmosphere had shifted from stiff formality to a quiet paranoia as every staff member became hyper-aware of how they moved, spoke, and behaved. Gone were the lazy side comments, the forced chuckles at inappropriate jokes, and the offhand dismissals of less important clients. In their place was an anxious silence where eyes flicked to corners to check for cameras and every interaction was second-guessed. But the irony wasn't lost on Raymond Vega, who knew this manufactured politeness was nothing more than fear wearing a bow tie. It wasn't transformation, it was performance. The true test was never about watching them behave when the cameras were obvious. It was about what they did when they thought they were alone, unmonitored, safe. So Raymond added a new layer. Hidden observers, licensed actors posing as customers, were sent in with detailed scripts to expose who still wore masks and who had simply become better at hiding their worst instincts. The results were even more disturbing than he'd anticipated. One woman in HR was caught discouraging a job application from a black veteran, subtly implying they weren't prioritizing military backgrounds this quarter. A finance officer was overheard advising a male customer not to bring his wife to the final negotiation, saying, "Trust me, they always get emotional." And Gerald remained the poisonous core. When he thought no one was watching, he still berated the cleaning staff, mocked Ava to her face by calling her intern Barbie, and confided in another manager that he was biding his time until the billionaire got bored. Raymond didn't flinch at these discoveries. Instead, he let the dealership dig its own grave. What none of them realized was that Raymond had been secretly live-streaming select footage to a closed group of journalists, regulators, and former employees who had lodged discrimination claims years prior. He had turned the dealership into a sealed case study, one that would soon detonate in a public forum. But before he pulled that trigger, he did something no one expected. He invited Gerald to dinner. Not to threaten him. Not to trap him. But to talk. At a private dining room in one of Raymond's own hotels, Gerald arrived wearing a nervous smile and too much cologne. "Mr. Vega," he said, extending a hand. Raymond shook it. Not out of respect, but out of calculation. They sat, and the waiter poured the wine. For 20 minutes, they spoke about nothing. Football. Weather. Local real estate. And then Raymond leaned forward and asked the question that shifted everything. "Do you know why I haven't fired you?" Gerald blinked, caught off guard. "I assumed this was your way of punishing me." Raymond shook his head. "Firing you would have let you play the victim. Leaving you here exposed what you are, without interference." Gerald chuckled nervously. "And what am I?" Raymond studied him, the way one studies a dangerous insect. "A relic of a world that rewards arrogance, punishes vulnerability, and thinks power is something you flaunt instead of earn." Gerald scoffed, trying to retake control. "I've built this team. I've increased margins. You think you can teach ethics in 2 months?" Raymond's voice lowered. "I'm not teaching. I'm revealing. And what's been revealed is that rot doesn't start at the bottom. It starts at the top." He pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. Inside were printed statements from customers, internal reports, and a breakdown of every unethical interaction tied to Gerald. "This goes live in 2 days," Raymond said. "Unless you resign and admit fault in writing." Gerald's face tightened. "You'd ruin me." "You ruined yourself," Raymond replied. "I'm just the mirror." But this wasn't about vengeance, not really. It was about systems, about how cruelty becomes protocol when left unchecked. The next day, Gerald resigned publicly. In his statement, he blamed stress, company transition, and personal issues. He didn't mention the girls. He didn't mention the truth. But he didn't need to. Raymond had already prepared a series of anonymous interviews, testimonials, and a mini-documentary that would air the following week under the title What Respect Really Looks Like. The final twist came when Ava and Lily, still interns by title but leaders in spirit, were invited to speak to the entire staff in what was billed as a team-building session. The employees had no idea who they really were, until Ava took the microphone, looked around the room, and said, "I came here once to dream. I was told I didn't belong. So I came back, to make sure no one else would hear that again." Gasps. Then silence. Lily stepped beside her and added, "You judged us by how we looked, not knowing we were the daughters of the man who now controls this place. But what hurts more is knowing this isn't rare. It's normal. And that's why it has to end." The applause was hesitant at first, then overwhelming. The message struck deeper than any corporate policy ever could. Because it wasn't about power. It was about presence. Ava and Lily didn't come back to gloat. They came to demonstrate that dignity doesn't need wealth to stand tall, it just needs someone to notice when it's missing. And by the end of that day, those who remained at the dealership didn't just see them as the boss's daughters. They saw them as mirrors, too. Quiet reminders that the smallest voices often echo the loudest when the world is finally listening. In the weeks that followed, the dealership went through a name change. It was rebranded under Vega Global Holdings as Veritas Motors, a name chosen deliberately to symbolize transparency, integrity, and the unveiling of truth. But Raymond Vega didn't hold a grand reopening ceremony. He didn't pose with oversized scissors or invite the press for photo ops. Instead, he held a private meeting on a rainy Tuesday morning with every employee who had stayed through the 60-day experiment. The remaining staff, now stripped of its toxic core, was a blend of humbled veterans and sharp new hires vetted by Clara's ethics team. The dealership had become something of a local legend. Stories swirled online about what had really happened behind those glass walls, but Raymond never confirmed or denied anything. He let the mystery feed the movement. Word spread across the industry. Other dealerships began quietly reaching out for guidance, asking how to adopt similar accountability systems without turning their workplaces into viral nightmares. Raymond refused to consult. He wasn't building a business model. He was building a warning. Let others draw their own lines in the sand, but they would do so knowing someone had drawn theirs in stone. Inside the newly painted walls of Veritas Motors, Ava and Lily stood side by side in front of the full team for a final address. They wore sharp navy blazers, not for style, but for symbolism, strength without arrogance. "This isn't a second chance," Ava began, her voice steady. "It's a new standard." Lily nodded, adding, "And it's not about us. It never was. It's about the people who walked in here afraid they wouldn't be seen. It's about the ones who spoke up and were laughed at. Who worked twice as hard for half the credit." They didn't need to mention Gerald or show footage of the worst days. The silence in the room said enough. Every person present had witnessed what happened when the wrong people were given unchecked power, and what could be rebuilt when power was shared instead of hoarded. At the back of the room, Raymond watched with his arms crossed, not as a billionaire, but as a father. He hadn't just restored dignity to his daughters, he'd passed the torch to them. And now, he was ready to disappear again, his work in this chapter done. But before he left, he made one final move that caught even Ava and Lily by surprise. He called them into the private office that once belonged to Gerald and placed 2 identical velvet boxes on the desk. "Before I walk out of here for good, I want to give you something," he said. When they opened the boxes, inside were 2 keys, each engraved with their initials and the emblem of the Rolls-Royce Ghost series they had arrived in on day 1. Ava looked up, stunned. "Dad!" Raymond smiled faintly. You've earned them. Not because of what happened to you, but because of how you responded. With clarity. With courage. You never raised your voices. You raised the bar. Lily blinked back tears. We don't need the cars, Dad. He nodded. I know. That's why you deserve them. But the keys weren't the end. Beneath them lay a sealed envelope addressed to both girls. Ava opened it first. Inside was a letter stating that ownership of Verita's Motors would transfer to them, in full, over the next 6 months. Raymond would step back completely, granting them full operational control, equity, and the final say in all major decisions. You don't just inherit money, he said softly. You inherit responsibility. Let this place be more than a dealership. Let it be a proving ground for what the future of business can look like. The final scene of the story didn't unfold in a boardroom or a press conference. It took place in the dim warmth of the garage beneath their estate. Raymond stood alone beside the 2 Rolls-Royces, running a hand across the hoods not with pride, but with reverence. These machines weren't status symbols to him. They were artifacts of patience, of restraint. He had the power to ruin Gerald in an instant, to dismantle the entire dealership in one dramatic move. But instead, he had chosen precision, reflection, and structure. Because he knew the real victory wasn't proving you were right. It was proving you were better. Ava and Lily joined him quietly, holding their keys, not bragging, not beaming, but simply ready. He looked at them and said, There's one more thing I want you to remember. People will forget what you say, and sometimes even what you do. But they'll never forget how you made them feel. And you made them feel seen. They nodded. And as the garage door rose and the morning sun stretched across the floor, they drove out, not into applause or headlines, but into a new standard they had helped shape. Outside, a group of high school students stood waiting for a scheduled mentorship tour Ava and Lily had organized. Young girls and boys who had never stepped foot inside a luxury dealership, invited not to be sold to, but to be heard. It wasn't about selling cars anymore. It was about redefining the space where dignity met opportunity. And as Raymond watched from the top of the steps, unseen, he smiled one last time and turned away. He had built an empire. But they were building a legacy.